And as we earlier talked about the sigmas, the V potential corresponds to the sigma equals 0, and the V vorticity corresponds to sigma equals 1, and the V pressure corresponds to the sigma equals 2. And for the singular solution, it is just reversed. Like V potential, it corresponds to sigma equals 2 and 1 and 0. Okay, now the question is, with the solution that we found, like we cannot take any V pressure, okay, because we need our solution to be unique. Now what happens is, see this equation. You can see that if instead of V vorticity, if we add another gradient of a scalar to this and take a curl of that, that's also a solution, isn't it? So what we can see, so this V potential is unique, but the V pressure is, V vorticity is no longer unique. It can be anything plus the V vorticity plus gradient of a scalar. And so it loses the degree of freedom. And here the V pressure, it loses 2 degrees of freedom. Like not really 2 degrees of freedom, but like
it gains 2 degrees.
I mean, yeah, sorry, it gains 2 degrees of freedom. Like it can assume 2 different values. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so what happens here? So you can see this particular property that it's not unique. It's called the gauge invariance. So we need to overcome this problem and find a unique solution. How do we do that? We can do that by using normalization technique with the Oseen tensors, and for this we need to define a potential solution, because the potential solution is fixed. It can be, it is unique. Okay, so how do we define our potential solutions? We take the gradient of this phi scalar harmonic, which is nothing but a solution of the Laplace equation, and if we can define our potential solution as this, and we need to take a constraint so that our solution becomes unique, and we can do so by making the outer products of the basis solution we got earlier to be fixed. Like, see, this is the basis solution for the coordinates, for the conduits and for the particles. We fix them, and in such a way, in that way, we ensure that our solution is unique. And this is the Oseen tensor. It is of this form, and this particular like fixing the gauge invariance leads to further simplification, and we get a relation between our transformation coefficients, like the TF and the TR star is this complex conjugate, and this happens to be the famous reciprocal theorem in a different form, of course. So now that we have got all our components ready, we get the final expressions for our basis solutions. See, like these are the E's we defined earlier, and the F, the small f, you remember, those are nothing but the elements of this matrix. Okay, and this is lambda mu, as it is, as you can understand. This is for the cylinder or the conduit surface. Okay, and these are the final expressions for the particle, and the E's we get are like this, and the F's are like this. Now we have the final expressions for our transformations. Well, you might ask a question like the sigmas, they have 0, 1, 2, 3 values. Okay, so how come we are having only three constraints, like 3 transformation coefficients? Like if we know TR, we can show TF because of the reciprocal relation we got. But actually what happens, there are 9 coefficients, some of them are 0, and these are the only 3 independent coefficients. The others can be expressed in terms of these coefficients. That's why we didn't write it here, and you can just see these 3 relations. That's good to define all the transformation coefficients. Now the numerical implementation. You can see the net force. Now our main objective was what? To determine all the forces, torques, and all the velocities and all these things, parameters, earthly parameters. So we have the net force acting on the particle like this. This FTT, FTR, these are the elements of that matrix we got earlier, that F. And they are related with the linear velocity and the angular velocity. And this Fp, Fx, this tau p, tau x, these are nothing but, if there is a parabolic flow, the force due to the parabolic flow, or the torque due to the parabolic flow, and if there is some external field like a gravitational field, then we can have this these extra terms. So we can define our forces and torques. Basically, we are relating the force-inducing parameters, which force-inducing parameters, which are the like the friction coefficients, with the force or torque defining parameters, like the linear velocity and the angular velocity. Okay, so it's a relation between them. That's a physical significance. And these friction coefficients are obtained from the F, as I told you, like this relation I showed you earlier. Well, now we have got our F and everything. Now let's talk about the errors that happened due to the, while we were numerically implementing, like getting the results, there were certain errors that have to come in. Mainly when we were integrating with respect to lambda, with the integral was finite, that was d lambda. Okay, and that's why there some error must have crept in because of that. Then instead of lambda, which the wave number, we would have integrated till infinity. However, we cannot do so, we cannot afford to do so, and it's not required also. So what we do is we integrate it from minus lambda max to plus lambda max. And in our case, mostly we took lambda max as 12, which produces fairly reasonable results. And then we have the finite summation over mu. Like again, mu is from minus mu max to plus mu max. Like we don't go for till infinity or anything like that. And then we had the equation earlier, like this one I mentioned that this is an infinite dimension equation, but we cannot use it like that. So what we do is we truncate it till a finite number, the L max. Well, now we have plotted the results. Basically, plotted it with respect to the d lambda to show the convergence for which value it shows steady results. We choose FTT because it is one of the most crucial friction coefficients, and it has a maximum problem with convergence. So we chose this particular value, particular coefficient. And you can see that the d lambda near about 0.15, it is fairly converged here. And these two graphs, this is for when the particle is closer to the axis of the cylinder, and this is when the particle is closer to the periphery of the cylinder. And you can see that, and these different lines, this one represents the radial component of the translation friction coefficient. This is the radial component. This is the azimuthal component, and this is the axial component. Similar for this one. And error due to truncation in lambda max, or the wave number. You can see that the result converges pretty much well around 5, you can say, here, and here also it's like 5, it converges. And the line types are similar as before, and it varies as this is for the particle closer to the axis, and this is for the particle closer to the periphery. You can notice one thing, that the convergence are pretty fast, which means that our algorithm is pretty efficient compared to the other ones. And error due to the truncation in the mu max, we can see it to be like this. This is also very well converged. Okay, one more thing, if you have noticed it earlier, like in all the cases, the convergence in the cases where the particle is closer to the axis is faster than when the particle is closer to the cylinder wall. You know why that happens? Because when it is closer to the cylinder wall, we have to use more cylinder basis solutions, and because of that there some errors creep in, and then we have to take a higher value of the parameters in order to get a well converged result, to make sure it's converged. The L max, we have plotted both the translation friction coefficient and rotation friction coefficient. And you can see the results to be like this, well converged at L equals 6. However, for all our studies, we have taken L as 12. Well, now let's get on with the hydrodynamic resistance in quiescent fluid inside a cylinder. See, the relevant frictions in the quiescent fluid acting on the particle will be like translation friction coefficients. It is represented as this. These FTT and FRR are, due to symmetry, they are diagonal matrices. And so is FTR and FRT, they are transposed to each other due to symmetry. And this translation means the first translation is the motion of the particle, and the second translation is the direction in which the force is acting on the particle. So for the rotation, it is the rotation of the particle and the torque acting due to the rotation of the particle. This is what it represents, and you can see that there are only 8 coefficients, and if we know these 8 coefficients, we are good to define the entire dynamics of the particle in a quiescent fluid. So let's see the force acting on the translating sphere. Here we have plotted the normalized force acting on the sphere with respect to its distance of separation from the axis of the cylinder, the r. Okay, and these 3 different line types, you might be wondering what it is. It is nothing but the relative geometry of the cylinder to the sphere, like a by a1. As we defined, the cylinder radius is a and the particle radius is a1. So a by a1 is varied. Okay, and we get this kind of results. It's like near the wall, the friction, due to lubrication, the friction, the viscosity increases, and therefore you can see as this represents the axis, and so it's and this represents the closer to the wall, cylinder wall, and you can see that so you can predict it easily that it increases monotonously. It's nothing so great.
What are the A over A1 values here?
It is 2, 3 and 4.
So 2 is the top, the solid line is 2.
Yeah.
And A was the radius of the cylinder and A1 is the particle.
Yeah.
3. And it's normalized by Stokes force, right?
Yeah, it's normalized by Stokes force. Now the torque on the rotating sphere. We have represented the similar line types like A by A1 as 2, 3, 4, and then we have the distance of separation from the axis of the cylinder and the different torques, and they also increase monotonously and as expected. Then we have the translation, rotation, coupling, cross coefficients, the G and G dash we showed earlier. You can see that they are also plotted in a similar fashion with different parameters of A by A1 and the R. But they are not non-monotonous. They are not monotonous because of 2 different forces acting at the same time. One due to the pressure build-up within at the axis, and one due to the lubrication forces near the periphery of the cylinder. So these 2 forces are opposing each other. They are contradicting each other, and as you can see that this pressure build-up, it reaches a maximum or an extrema, you can say, and then then the lubrication forces overcome it, and then it starts decreasing. So this is expected of this kind of dynamics. Now we validated our results by comparing it with the analytical results from before. However, we are limited to using it for the limiting cases, since they are available only for limiting cases and they are only available for the axial motion. So we choose this particular friction coefficient and we try to validate it using the singular perturbation technique and the method of reflection. Here, the solid line represents our analysis, the dotted line represents the singular perturbation technique, and the dashed line, they represent the method of reflection. As you can see, like when it is closer to the cylinder axis, sorry, not the cylinder axis, but when the particle geometry is comparable to the cylinder geometry, then our results match more with the singular perturbation technique. And as I already discussed earlier, that the speciality of that method is it talks more about the particle when it is closely fitted with the cylinder, and that result is given more accurately by this singular perturbation technique. And as we increase the the conduit size compared to the particle size, we can see that our results match more with the general reflection method, which is a very good thing for us, because this method describes this kind of situations more appropriately.
So this is for axisymmetric.
Yes, this is for axisymmetric configuration.
So when you said limiting cases, is it just motion in what was limiting about it?
Limiting in terms of the configuration of the particle size. For like general method of reflection, the particle size is very small when compared to its distance from the axis. It has to be very small.
So
Not
basically,
distance from the axis, but this cylindrical surface, right?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, yeah. Cylindrical surface.
so you're talking about the two extremes of those curves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
One limited case is the left hand side. And
Another
the
case of the middle. But for the middle, we have
So
to,
it's
we can't
basically
validate it.
A by A1 tends to 1 and another is A by A1 tends to
Tends to
infinity.
And that's just a flat surface.
Tends to infinity.
Yeah,
should be.
Its cylinder radius is infinite, is it? A over A1.
If it is infinity.
If it is
then
infinity,
of
then
course.
reflection method will really work. Okay. So that's pretty uninteresting actually. But
Then we validated our results for an eccentrically positioned particle, and we couldn't use the singular perturbation technique because if we try to place the particle eccentrically, that method is no longer valid. And so we just validated it using the general reflection method. And you can see this is it matches with the accuracy level of about 0.1% with the general reflection method. And for the G, you can see the reflection method was unable to predict this kind of change for the G because of its limitations, and our method is better in that respect. Now we implement a parabolic flow on the particle, and we can see the force acting due to the parabolic flow as this. We get the results to be this, and similar to previous ones, the particle size is the A by A1 is varied along these curves, and the radius of separation, the distance of separation is varied along this. For the linear and angular velocities of the free particle, so such that there is no force or torque acting on it, it's free, so we get this kind of linear velocity, and the angular velocity you can see to be like this. So the summary and conclusion, we can say that general mathematical procedure, which we call the basis transformation method, has been developed, which can be used to develop faster algorithms to solve various kinds of fluid mechanical problems. Then, unlike the past studies, our method is more general. We can consider more different kind of configurations and particle position and different kind of motions. Then, same here, the method allows description of axial, translational and rotational motion along with radial and as well as the motions in the radial and azimuthal directions. It is extremely efficient. As we saw, the convergence rate is really high, and up to 1% accurate results within less than a minute can be achieved with a 2 GHz machine. We have described the general dynamics of a particle in a quiescent fluid completely, and also when the particle is fixed in a parabolic flow, we have calculated all the forces and torques acting on it, and also the general dynamics when the particle is moving freely in the flow. What can we expect in future? Well, a lot. First of all, we can extend this single particle system to a multi-particle system so that we can take into consideration all those complex things we were talking about, the complete blood flow or all the particle motions in blood flow we can take into account. Then we can do some simple modifications with the reflection relation so that we can consider many body interactions in not only single surfaces but also in annular geometries. Then this can be applied to vector equations other than Stokes equation. We just used it for Stokes equations with Dirichlet boundary conditions, but we can apply it to other vector equations as well. For example, we can solve the problems involving oscillating fields, periodically oscillating fields, or stress-free interfaces, or surfactant covered surfaces, and so on. So a lot can be done in future. Well, thank you. Questions?
Okay.